Good morning to any replayers. If you're a replayer, you can still participate. How can you participate? Well, if you're new to me, hi Lily, good to see you on here. If you're new to me, you can follow me. So hi Christy. And you can swipe right and you can hit follow. You can also, you can share with your followers. Make sure you do. You invite people. Maybe they're not on Periscope. Maybe they're not on any social media. You say, you know what? I know that you're interested in learning more about money and join us, join the conversation. So I'm going strong and I'm pretty excited about what I've been doing. And also I've gotten a lot more engagement, a lot of questions. And I think that that's really what's amazing about these periscopes and this idea of engaging with people is that people ask questions that you may not even thought about, but you're like, oh, right, that's really something I haven't thought about or I haven't asked or something Joanna talks about, but it's like, it hasn't been real clear. So, all right. For those that are joining live, I know this is only a couple people, but that's all right. My name is JoannazArach, and I do a Money Habits broadcast every single day, 7 days a week. And actually this afternoon at 5 o'clock Central, I will be doing a Money Matters broadcast, and I want to talk to you guys about big purchases. I think that there's a lot of hype around big purchases, and there's a lot at stake when big purchases are made. And what do I mean? I'll talk about what I mean by those big purchases, and just for you to get your mind around it. And I'll talk about my big purchases that I've made throughout my life. Cars, houses, education, healthcare. Okay, but to the topic today. So what do I want to talk to you guys about today? All right, it's tax season. Tax season is upon us. So we've talked about taxes a bunch of time. And actually this morning I read a little article on tax preparation, and it was by a tax preparer, and he remained anonymous because he was trying to encourage people to do your own taxes. And I, of course, I encourage everyone to do the taxes exercise and do your taxes. Why? Because you're going to pay a lot for tax preparation that you probably don't need. Most people have a very simple tax return. And then I know this is US centric, so if you're watching from elsewhere, it might not be might not pertain, but most people, if you meet the income cutoff, so if you're a student or you're younger or maybe you're out of work, and TurboTax Online is one of many options. I use TurboTax. Why? Because it's Intuit. That's a very reputable company. They are the #1 tax preparation software. So I've been using TurboTax since whenever it came out, in the 90s, right? When it became software, you used to buy the CD and everything and put it on. But I've been using TurboTax for quite some time, and my returns have become increasingly complex. So I've been purchasing it, right? It's not meeting the low income cutoff, but also purchasing it because it's become increasingly complex. And I use it for my business taxes too. And again, because I want my business to be as profitable. And so, if it's something that's going to take me literally 20 minutes, why would I pay someone $300 for it? That's because I'm frugal and I'm capable. But so I'm not saying everyone needs to understand the complexities. If you do have a complex tax return, I understand. But what's going to happen is early on in life, you're going to have very simple tax returns. And when you don't take, so when you have a complex return, I totally understand it, right? You have, your income stream may be complicated. So if you are paying someone for that service, that's fine. You do here's what I say. One is make sure after your tax return's been filed to kind of read through it. And when I say read through it, is just look at which boxes are there, where you got a deduction, right? Did you get oh, look, a child care credit, or oh, look, we moved, right? So the tax, what's taught me over the years by doing the taxes myself is understanding what I need to keep track of for tax time, right? So when you are, oh, thank you for the hearts. Yeah, some people don't know that, right? So it's if you have so for me, it's also the tax preparation person. So if you have an accountant, someone you've been working for years, they actually get to know your situation, and they know your question, right? So it's very personalized. I think that service is actually worth it, but a lot of people go to like places like H&R Block. And again, it's a service, but H&R Block, it just has a person with software, right? So it's not the same person. Usually you don't see them, the same person every year. You come in, you get in a queue, you get the next open person, and they'll just ask you the standard questions. And they're only gonna, so based on your answers, and it's a pretty good interview software, so not to knock it, but if you don't bring it up and they don't ask you, then you'll never know, right? And so, and again, if you have a complex situation, it may be worth the money. But if you just have a W-2 and not a lot of deductions, that's literally like 5 numbers you've got to put in. The other thing is when you get to do, when you start doing TurboTax and you do that next year, like it just imports, like a lot of the things that you need to put in, all the information. Yeah, right, exactly, right? So when you have someone who's familiar with your field, that's even more impactful, right? And if you have like, they understand, right? Because they dealt with that situation. But when you're just kind of coming into the anonymous place, then that's going to be really, really difficult. And it's not to say they miss things, because again, the interview software is really good, but this is for like, what is the rate of what you're making to the time that you would spend doing it? So again, for very simple returns, first job out of college, if you start doing it, you go, oh, that's not too hard, right? And so you give yourself the option. So here's what I want to do. I want people to feel capable of doing it themselves as an option, right? And so when you feel like it's not something you can handle, you either will overpay for it, or in some cases, people just get overwhelmed and they don't fill it out, right? And so because it gets complicated, like they're like, oh my God, it's Schedule C and the tax deductions, and they just don't know enough, and they don't feel empowered to do it. Why? Because the messaging out there is that the taxes are too complicated for you and you can't do it. And I'm saying for like 90% of people, even 95% of people, they're not. And so it's really to empower people to take control over their own situation, especially people who are struggling with money, right? So if you're making a minimum wage job and if you have a credit card debt, you're going to go to that place and they're going to say, well, it's $150 to fill it out, and we'll take it out of your refund. So you'll never actually even see it. And you're like, oh, great. Money I never saw that I paid. Because if you actually came in with like a bunch of crisp bills and you had to pay for the tax preparation, you'd probably think about it twice. And then they're like, well, we can give you a refund anticipation loan because you can get your money today. And, this is like an extra $100 off your return. And you're like, great, I need the money, right? I'm struggling. I need it. It's going to be in my pocket today. And if you take a $100 crisp bill and would you hand it over, or instead say, you know what, I'm willing to wait for 2 weeks, right? 2 weeks to do that. And so I think that people are intimidated by the tax forms, and and again, I know that like it's easy to say, oh, I'm going to make mistakes. It's fine. That's why I say if you're having someone else do your taxes and you do it this year as well because you don't feel comfortable, make sure after you do it, it's not just like, oh, that's a load off my mind. Like, read your tax return and say, how many boxes, right? This is what I would do, say, how many boxes have a number in it, right? And a lot of it, and by the way, if it's the same number, that just means that it's copied. So it's not like you had to do any calculations. But look at the boxes that have a unique number. And if it's less than 10, you could have done it, right? So that's why, look at the complexity, right? Like, obviously, if you have a Schedule A and a Schedule B and a Schedule C and a Schedule D, all of a sudden you're like, wow, that was like 300 entries, right? That I had to make into my tax form. I get it. That is a lot. And so, but for the people that have only 10 entries on their tax form and are paying the $150 for someone else to put 10 figures into their software and not do anything special, because again, the software calculates it. How do I know this, right? Because I volunteered, so I never worked for a tax preparation service, but I volunteered for, 6 years in a row before I had kids in the tax assistance program, which was basically for low-income families to get their tax filled out for free with the same software that professionals use. Thank you for the hearts. And I went in and I would sit with families and they would bring all their stuff and I would do the interviews, right? Or I would check other people. At some point I became a checker, which means I would check other people's work. So I actually seen a lot of it, right? And so you would take, we were a volunteer organization, so it would take a little bit of time because we didn't have their data necessarily, or sometimes we would. So we tried to make sure that if they came multiple years in a row, that we could do it for them. But that's another resource for you. Every city, and I know that there are volunteer organizations that will teach you how to do taxes, and they'll do them for you if you're really low income, right? And obviously the people who are kind of like above the cutoff or who have a 1099 and Schedule Cs, because some of those organizations will be like, Schedule Cs take a long time, so which means we would serve fewer people. So sometimes they'll eliminate people who are 1099s, but 1099s are here to stay, right? And like more and more we're gonna if you're doing any sort of piecemeal work or any platform that you're using, whether it's babysitting or Uber or whatever, Sitter City, like eventually there's gonna be more and more of these like income sources that are not straight W-2, and people's lives are going to become complicated. And so my message is the earlier you start understanding how you do taxes, the more empowered you will have to have a choice, and you'll understand what goes into it. So even if you have someone else do your taxes, I think that's so important for you. Just take 5 minutes and literally look at the boxes that have numbers in them and just look over and say, what was in it, right? What's in it? And, student loan deduction, like understand there's an impact on that. IRA contribution, right? Like all those things. And then it will become less overwhelming. So then next time you can go and you're like, oh, I've looked at this form 2 or 3 years, because everything's a long-term game, guys. Everything's building on your skill set. And say, what else? Like, is there something that I'm missing, right? What else? And like, I read the long tax forms and I'm like, nah, I don't have this, I don't have this, I don't have this. But at some point you might, right? Like if you become a shareholder of a company, you may be dealing with K-1 forms. And if you have a rental property, right? Like at some point, like understand what the income, I understand what the income sources are, right? Because the 1040 shows you what the most common income sources are and what are the most common sources of deductions. Same with Schedule A, right? Understand what's on the Schedule A. And sometimes like what people do is then, not here, sorry. And sometimes people will look for like Schedule A, you may understand like what's deductible and what's not. Nope, no M&M. And so you can look at that, right? So Schedule A will be your deductions, Schedule B for your dividends and interest, right? Schedule C if you have a 1099 and the deductions on there, right? So that's the more complicated, the more complicated it is for you, the thicker the tax return, the more I feel like you would benefit from learning about it. So anyway, that's the message is really about giving yourself some options to feel empowered and to feel like you understand taxation. Why? Because it really makes a difference in the long term of how well you understand the tax code and how well you take advantage of it. And again, for me, the value of doing taxes is not actually the time or the money that you would pay for the preparation services. Thank you for the hearts, but the understanding of what goes into it, right? And what's taxed at different rates. And like what I love about TurboTax is there's this little ticker at the top where it shows you like how much do you owe your refund. And so every time you type in, you're like, oh, charitable deductions. Like good thing I tracked all the stuff that I gave because now I'm doing it. And like it forces you to make sure you're keeping track of all the documents and all the receipts that are relevant throughout the year. Because I always tell people like accountants are not magicians and tax preparers are not magicians. Like if you give them nothing, like they have nothing to work with. And even for, myself, right? Like charitable deductions on the items, like that's my bane of my existence, right? Because like there's like, it's deductible and I use the software, but you still have to like keep track because otherwise you're just making things up, right? You're like, oh, 5 boxes of stuff. I think it was $500. I don't know. I like being accurate. Right? And it's kind of a pain when you're like donating items. And I just like using the market value that it's deductible tool gives you. But then it teaches me like, oh, next time I gotta make an Excel spreadsheet with like name and quantity, and now I'm making my husband do it when he goes to donate. I'm like, it's not good enough for you to just take those boxes out of the house, and that's very much appreciated. But if we're actually gonna bother, like, we need a spreadsheet. And so things like that, things that I've developed over time, where I'm like, wow, that was a real pain in the butt. I gotta like have a better system for it. And even now, like the forms are coming in, right? The barrage of tax forms are coming in. I'm like, I have got to get my folder, right? Because like one of the systems I have is like I create one folder and I just stick every tax form in it till I'm ready to do it, and then print it, and like I'll write on the top, because again, it's just become so complex, right? Yeah, so get your folder and make sure you don't miss anything, right? Because again, you're gonna have to provide it all, and the more complex it becomes, like we have so many like 1099 forms from banks and investment accounts, right? Like I'm not as streamlined, like it's just complex because of the complicated lives we lead, and merging finances and all that, so we end up with a lot of different forms, so many, right? So many 1099 forms, whether you're working, that's investment, your interest, your dividends, all of those forms come in. My lending club like has like the different investments that I do have created like different types of forms that have to go on different types of tax areas, and I'm like, oh, lending club, man, it's like it's added an extra 10-20 minutes, because the first time I did it I was like, I don't even know like when this form goes, but once you do it once, the next year it should be easier. So yes, the message is like, keep track of your forms, review your tax return, and again, make yourself do it. 5 minutes on the timer and just go, okay, where are the numbers? And then once you get over that, to say like, are there things that I could be taking advantage of, like 529 contributions, right? Like in your state, doesn't matter, maybe it doesn't. And just become aware of more and more things, and say, will this ever apply to me, right? So it may not be relevant today or even tomorrow or next year or in 5 years, but one day you'll be like, wow, when I'm making this, I need to make sure I keep track of my receipts for this activity, because it will be going in my tax return, and you're getting a 28% return on that, on keeping track of things. And that's the other thing that people don't understand, is how much return you get on that investment in your record keeping, and how important it is. And it could be just as like a habit of having one folder that you're like, everything I put in this folder. It doesn't have to be super complicated. So awareness, education, and then taking advantage of all of the taxes. That's it. I know that it's and I talk to people individually, and they get very intimidated. So I just want to sort of demystify some of the tax things. And if anybody ever has tax questions, ask me. I've taken a lot of tax coursework. I've been doing it for 20 years. I fill out like pretty much every complicated form on that the IRS have. So if you are tackling your own taxes and you have a question, you can ask me on Twitter, you can ask me here, you can send me a Snapchat, like on video, hey, I have this, what would you do, or what do you think? I'm always happy to give you my my perspective and encourage you to do it. So thanks everyone for joining today, and 5 p.m. We're doing Money Matters on big purchases, because I do think that that's where you like actually can make or break your net worth, your building your financial freedom, when you're sort of clouded by the emotional and the sort of the big thing of purchases, and how to be more thoughtful about it, or how to even just do a trade-off. And we'll get into some of the details in the future ones. So thank you so much for joining, and I'll see you guys either tonight, tomorrow, or some other day, every day on Money Habits. Bye.